Welcome to continuation of the life of Christ. The lesson for today will come from Matthew chapter 24, verses 15, starting at verses 14. Matthew chapter 25, sorry. Matthew chapter 25. And as the PowerPoint comes up, we will start talking about readiness and stewardship. Readiness and stewardship is going to be the focus of the discussion. Okay. Swap out the mics right quick.
And as you see the slides, it talks about responsibility and risk, a little bit about the responsibility and risk. And we're just going to read a few of the scriptures to kind of give us an overall context. In Matthew chapter 25, starting at verses 14. And the Bible reads, "For the kingdom of heaven is as a man traveling to a far country, who called his own servants and delivered unto them his goods. And to one he gave 5 talents, another 2, and another 1, and to every man according to his several ability, and straightway took his journey." We're just going to stop right here and to kind of dig and nug this out a little bit more. A lot of times when we are talking about, we come to this passage and we see talents, a lot of times we are thinking about ability. We translate it into our modern term of ability. But if you look at the Greek, if you have your blue letter Bible, if you go there, it's talking about finances. It's talking about funds. And that's what we want to look at and kind of keep it in its appropriate context. He's talking about money in this capacity. Yes, sometimes we can use the scripture and certain things fit. Using and kind of referencing talents does work, but the true context of this scripture is talking about finances, money. There's always a understanding that when the master of these servants has already employed them due to their ability, and we can use the word talent. The masters already understand that you possess a certain ability, right? You possess his trust because you are working for the master in this capacity. You understand he has selected you because you have the ability already. And what he's now providing you is the resources to execute the responsibility and to showcase that ability that you already possess. So a lot of us can have a lot of ability or talent, but if you don't have the resources to execute that, then how can you really accomplish the things that's set before you? So we just want to keep this scripture in its appropriate context. It's talking about money and the master entrusting you with his resources, and he's trusting your capability. And also something that's implied is that in understanding who the master is, you as his servant understand his will. And unlike you being his servant, the master has trained you and guided you almost like an apprenticeship program to where you understand how the master conducts his business, the master personality, the master's temperament, his expectation for you. So there's nothing confusing about what is expected, only your willingness to execute the master's will. See, that's really the crux of the story. It's not about the money, it's not about the talent, it's not about the ability, it's your will and desire to execute the master's will. It's kind of like we use a parent-child relationship, right? Going back to my grandmother, this lady never used a mop in her life. She had a bucket and a scrub brush, and if she ever had to clean, she cleaned on her knees. Now, when we were at her house, we were working with her, that was the expectation. And some of us, when we were younger, we had to go clean our aunt's house or clean our grandparents' house. We did not want to clean like grandma. We looked for that mop. We looked for a easier way to get the job done. But Mrs. Willie Mae Mack cleaned on her knees. She had that bucket and she down there elbow greasing it out. She did not use a mop, right? And that's kind of what we want to talk about, is that there's an understanding of what is done by the master's example and showing and teaching. And it's only about us carrying out the master's will. It says, are we in line with the master's will, and are we willing to do the work that he set before us? Because the example is apparent to us all. And so that's what we kind of want to look at and understand before we get into the story. And also another point that I want to illustrate is that for our nation and for us as a culture, we didn't grow up in the master servant culture. And sometimes when we hear those words, it kind of resonates in a negative way if we look at our culture. But when we're dealing with the scriptures, we always want to go to the scriptures and let the scriptures determine what a slave and master relationship looks like, to put it in its appropriate context. Can somebody get for me Genesis chapter 24? Genesis chapter 24. We're going to look at the example of Abraham and his servant, right? And so let's look at, somebody read for me Genesis chapter 24, verses 1-7. We just want to get a biblical example of what when God is talking about that master-slave relationship, we need to put it in the context. We don't need to look at our history in America for slavery. We don't need to look to the world example. We need to look to the scripture and get the appropriate example of what a master and slave relationship looks like. So if someone has Genesis chapter 24, verses 1-7, can you read that out loud, please?
And see, in this story in Genesis chapter 4, Genesis chapter 4, verses 1-7, which was read in our hearing, this is the patriarch Abraham. He's well in years. He is giving his servant one of the most important tasks that a person can be given. His servant is going to go and pick out a wife for his son, right? And Abraham is letting his servant know about the promises that God made about through the Abrahamic seed, Christ is going to come into the earth, and he has to present a specific type of woman who has those values that God desires. So Abraham is giving his servant who is in charge of his whole house. So we see the trust, we see the relationship, we see that the slave was to value what the master valued. What did Abraham value? Abraham valued God's will. It's not like when we think of a master-servant relationship, it's like a vindictive thing where it's petty. Like, I just want to exercise my power and authority over you. Like, hey, I'm got my feet up, go make me a sandwich, go bring me a cup of iced tea. It's like, no, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the slave being in line with the master's will and seeing what the master's will truly is. And when you see Abraham's job was to please and serve God and to prepare his family in the right way. And so when we see that context, it gives us the appropriate perspective of how we should view that slave and master relationship. Yes.
So obviously, for me, I started when he was sold into slavery, and then when he became number two to Pharaoh.
Yeah.
He's still the same in the same role the whole time, because if not, Pharaoh could have asked, "Can I go back to my people?" And then home, but he's still in that slave role. But look at the trust and the power and the ability that he had next to Pharaoh.
Yeah.
And so even the thought that Joseph was a slave is still a similar applicability.
Yes, Simona kind of jumped ahead and stole it with my thunder. She went and talked about Joseph and Potiphar to say like, when you look at the term slave, right? And we look at in that context, right? Sometimes we just see slave, but when we look at the position, the responsibility, it's almost as if he is vice president of operations. This is like, if you got like Jeff Bezos up top, you know, if you look at this thing of Joseph, he's right underneath. Look at look at the responsibility that Abraham has invested in his servant. So if you just take that title slave out and look at the responsibilities and the power and authority that has been invested in this person, it's almost like you are the CEO. Abraham is the president, you know, he's the owner of the corporation, but the servant is like his chief executive officer. He understands his will, he understands this, and Abraham has invested all of this trust in this person. It's not like he's being micromanaged. It's like, I've trained you, I've groomed you, I've expressed my care and concern for you. And so it's the idea that not just a slave out there sweeping and cleaning up and doing menial tasks, is that these are significant tasks that have been entrusted to these individuals. And like I say, and when we look at that slave and master relationship, it's either you could be working for a good, honest Christian person, God-fearing person like Abraham, and we will transition to Genesis chapter 8 with Joseph, where he's working from someone in the world, that he's in that more traditional form of slavery.
Whatever the case may be. But like the parable in Matthew, what were his abilities? What did the master determine he can do? And he rose from maybe possibly sweeping and mopping from the lowest level to, with his faithfulness, with his trustworthiness, he rose to that with his ability. Not everybody can get there, obviously, but he did attain or get to that level. I think just the similarities in the story.
And the reason why Joseph was able to do that was because God was with him. And he trusted God. He took him first. Even though he was slave, he knew that God was with him even in his slavery.
Yeah, and so like I said, we just want to, as we get into this study, we just want to kind of combat any stigma, any worldly stigma that is brought into the scriptures. We want to see that there is value in this, right? And so God talks about being a slave in the scripture, outlines being a slave. It's not something that we should cringe at. It's not something that we should just kind of ball up because we may have a negative experience and look at things from that worldly point. We want to look at what the scripture says about that. And again, it's based on merit. It's based on an inherent desire and capability of that person. And when we see slave, the idea of slave, look at what that person arose to by their capability, by who they are. And so we just want to always kind of like foot stomp that piece, is that the talents is apparent. Did this person really apply themselves like Abraham? So he applied himself. He already possessed the talent, right? But now through the desire, his will, the exercising of his capability, look where he found himself at and look what he's involved in. And that's the part we really want to footstep, right? This servant is involved in assisting Christ being come into the world. He's been assisting with finding a bride for Isaac, someone who's going to keep him and be faithful and keep the promises of God alive to support him in that effort, right? Look in the importance of that task that's been put on. Genesis 38. Can I get another reader for Genesis 38? Genesis 38. Hold on. Sorry. Oh, excuse me. Genesis 39. Genesis 39, verses 1 through 5. But no, Genesis 39, verses 1 through 6. 39, 1 through 6.
officer, Pharaoh, captain of the guard, the Egyptian, brought them of the hands of Israelites, which have brought them down thither. And the Lord was with Joseph, and he was a prosperous man, and he was in the house of his master, the Egyptian. And his master saw that the Lord was with him, that the Lord made all that he did to prosper in his doing. And Joseph found grace in his sight, and he served him. He made him overseer over his house, and all that he had, he put into his hands. And it came to pass in the time that he had made him overseer his house, and over all that he had, the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. And the blessing of the Lord was upon all that he had in the house and in the field. He left all that he had in Joseph's hand. He knew not all he had, save the bread that which he did eat. And Joseph was a goodly person and well favored.
So it says Potiphar he was well established in Egyptian society, right? You look that he was an officer, captain of the guard. But when did blessing enter Pharaoh's house? By Joseph, the slave, Potiphar's house was blessed, right? So we just want to say that capability, no matter the circumstance, sometimes we can look at the circumstance, right? Whether you got a godly master, whether you have a worldly master, right? It's about you exercising your gifts and your talents for the glory of God and to serve in a capacity, the appropriate capacity, right? Like we always say, the talent is there, right? And something we don't want to say is like, oh, I don't have ability. God created you. God did not create anything that could not accomplish his will and do meaningful things in society and the world, right? It's about our willingness to serve. And you see what Joseph becomes, right? Like I said, we use modern terms. He went from the mailroom, now he's on the board of directors, right? It's about, sometimes we can get up in titles, but you see the trust that's being put in on the person. That this person, Joseph, we see him is willing to serve in whatever capacity that he found himself in. And look at the trust that's being placed upon him, right? His master has that trust in him, right? That he's not going to do anything to his goods, his persons, that his benefit, the master's benefit, is in the foremost mind of these individuals, right? And so we want to, like I say, I just want to stay here for a little bit of time to kind of negate that negative connotation when we think of master and slave, right? You can have a great, beneficial, meaningful relationship with these individuals, no matter where you're coming from, right? So we can be okay with doing the will of those above us. Yeah. Yes. Yes. Yeah.
And we just have to have that one land, that one man's focus on slavery in America.
Yeah.
So that kind of paints, our perspective of slavery, when we read about it in the Bible.
Yes, and so like our brother Thorne made a good point. It's like when we grow up in this society, our culture teaches slavery in one capacity, right? It's what our nation has done here. So when we see it and what we've been groomed with, it resonates. But that same perspective is shared in so many other biblical areas, right? If you're from a broken home, as those of us are who are from a broken home, you didn't look at marriage. When somebody started teaching about marriage, you just step back from it, like, look, all these problems, how can this be good? When what I see and what I saw was not something that was desirable for me, right? All that contention and problems, but then you say, let me see what the scripture says. So I'm seeing what the world says, but I have to relearn what scripture says, because those people did not do what God said. So we got to let God define what he means and what right looks like. See, this is what right looks like. It's not something in the scripture where you're demeaned and devalued, right? It's the idea that you need to focus on serving. If anybody ascends to any height in society, it's because they committed themselves to service. Whether Tiger Woods or Michael Jordan, if you see anybody accomplish anything, that they've committed themselves to their craft, right? They are trustworthy, they're committed, they're knowledgeable, they're dependable, they're be trustworthy. So the term is that they are slave to this work, right? Well, no matter what is required of them to do, they're going to do, right? You think of like the preachers who can quote those scriptures, know their Bible. They are committed so much so they're a slave to whatever the idea is, whatever I need to do to become good at this, I'm going to do it, right? And the thing is that you got to learn to embrace some of these terms because that's what God said. That's what Jesus said. Somebody can give me Matthew chapter 10, verse 25. Matthew 10, verse 25. And this is the direct words of Jesus. So like I said, we want to get knock out and kill that negative connotation about this matter of slave and master, right?
America.
Yeah.
People out there, people out with friends, their mind is stuck back to the time, our ancestors and things like
Yeah.
that. So, for me, it took for me to read the scriptures and understand that even in the Bible, when slaves were left, they left with something. They had to leave it, their masters had to give them, had to treat them right.
Yeah.
They could not, keep it in a kind way. And when it was time for them to leave, most of the time they were only there for, certain years, unless they were there for a certain time. I'm just saying they had to leave, they had to give them something before they left. They weren't just leaving empty-handed.
Yeah.
And so it took, I just would say it took for me to read the scriptures to understand.
Matthew 10:25, so I can get that scripture for me.
It is not enough for the disciple that he be as his master and servant of his Lord. If they have called the master of the house to the other Lord, how much more shall they call them to do the house?
Yeah, so like Jesus came down to serve, and this is Jesus talking about his disciples, right? It's like, don't look at what I'm doing and think that you're going to be excused from this as well. Because Jesus came down this earth not to do his will, but the will of the Father, right? Now, all those mistreatments, all that work, all that service, always lowering himself down in that servant capacity, washing the disciples' feet, doing all those things, right? Feeding the 5,000. Like Jesus is there to serve. He never left that capacity while he was on earth, right? On the cross being beat, he's still caring for the souls of men, right? And you think that you look at like, what is it? Acts chapter 6, the stoning of Stephen, right? We see God being engaged, right? Stephen looked at the heaven, God, Jesus standing, right? And then you see the calling of Paul, right? You think that Jesus just went up to heaven and stopped working? He's still mediating, he's still working. He called an additional apostle. So what we see is that idea of servitude was demonstrated on earth, carried right up to heaven. And you see Jesus when he's calling Paul and all these things, he's still working. He's still concerned about mankind. He's still concerned about the salvation of mankind. So we see that this idea of working is something that we have to fully embrace. So, like going back to Matthew chapter 25, we just want to highlight that and keep the scripture in its appropriate context, right? We see talent, and we always talk about ability and developing your ability. This parable doesn't talk about that. It speaks as if the ability is already present, the trust is already present, the teaching is already present, the understanding of the master's will is already present. The only thing that is lacking, or only thing that needs to be done, is execution. My understanding of this parable and reading, it's all about the execution, right? Everything is provided for you. It's about the execution of the master's will, right? Like I say, the master already has demonstrated trust. He's already has demonstrated that he trained you. You know what it is. He's provided things out of his pocket, the resources there. He understands your talent. He understands how much your ability is. That's why somebody got 5, somebody got 2, somebody got 1. He puts you in a place to succeed. Now, what you did with that is purely upon you. This is a story about our will and desire to serve and do. And it's always nice when a lot of times we are in a society where we want to feel good about ourselves, right? And we are in a society where you cannot be harsh or demanding, right? There's nothing wrong with being harsh and demanding, right? Growing up as a child, when somebody said, take out the trash, go mow the, there was a connotation of immediately, right? There's always, when the master gives you something, there's always immediately is built in, right? I learned from my older brother, when something is told, it's to be done immediately. There was no when, right? Because he got beat, the rest of us got in line. We saw him, so when somebody said, take the trash, it's immediate, right? It's built in, right? It said the servant got up immediately. It's built in. We have to be about the master's will, right? And that's how the master operates. The master is not operating in a way that he doesn't expect the servant to operate. This is a man who's fully committed, and he just needs you to be as committed as he is. That's the expectation, right? The master went, and then he set it in place, and guess what the servant did? Immediately. That's the goal for us, is immediate, is to prioritize the master's will and to get the work. And the 2-talent man did the same thing. There's an immediacy to the master's will. We understand the, if you ever work for someone, people say like, reading a couple articles about Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos and those type of individuals, or Michael Jordan or Tiger Woods, or being on these teams, they say these people are so committed that when, like Kobe Bryant, once the game is over, he's out there practicing. Once the people leave the stadium, he goes shower, stretch, go back, practice, right? Because he wants to improve on the things. And his expectation is that we all go back out there and work together as a team. And some people are like, hey, I'm ready to go home. I did my work, right? But the idea when you are dealing with people who are committed to their craft, right? Committed to their craft. Or you have people who, or you see like sometimes Brother Red Cross and Brother Greg, Brother Stevens and stuff, service is over, they start talking about the scriptures, right? They're talking about this, they're talking about that, they're bringing up points that Brother Greg made. They may talk about a lecture, like service is over, right? We worship. But do you ever hear brothers over there in the foyer still talking about the word and what it meant? And when you said this, I remember that last sermon you preached about this, really brought out a point. Like, is service over? But what? The word is still in their heart, right? It's still a priority. You'll see them talking about it and somebody else bring a point up. They'll just have the discussion. Some of us just like, oh man, it's a good point. Let's sit over here and listen to some of this, right? But you see the committedness of it, right? It's not just in this moment, right? But everything that the master does, the servants are supposed to follow. And you see the rebellion of the 1-talent man, right? We all have worked with people, we all have dealt with people who they will work, but they work harder and they do the same equivalent work to get out of something. We're like, if you just applied that same energy, you could have accomplished what the boss had told us to do, but you're going to do different work in a different capacity to try to get out of something. We say to try to say like, it's the same work. Why are you working opposite to the rest of us? It's like, you didn't come up with nothing new. This is not anything innovative. It's like, this is what the master's will is. You have the example of the master and everybody else is going this way. Tell me, what did you come up with where you thought this was a good idea? Like I said, we all have dealt with people who they spend more time trying to get out of work than just doing the actual task of getting accomplished, right? And then you look at the responsibility. It's not like you were the 1-talent man and was given 5 talents, you were given what you were able to do. And look at what you actually accomplished. So that's the thing that we have to look at in this story, is that where are we going to be at? And it's not about defaming the master, right? If you look down at the story, is that when everybody come back, can somebody read verse 24 and 25?
And he went to receive the one child and came and said, Lord, I knew thee that thou art a hard man, reaping where thou hast not sown, gathering where thou hast not strawed. And I was afraid, and I was hid thy child in the earth. Lo, there thou hast his down.
Yeah, he want to make excuses about the master, right? He did not apply himself, right? And you'll see that, because I've been a Christian, you'll hear people who say like, hey, I'm an introvert, right? I don't feel comfortable talking to people. I don't feel comfortable sharing the gospel. I don't know enough. And then you look at, you ever visit their house, not that, I don't want to say this so I don't get invited to your house, right? But you got a master's degree on the wall. You got a high school diploma on the wall. You got a bachelor's degree on the wall. So you have the capability to learn, right? And they will say these terms as if like, I'm giving myself a free pay, right? Like, hey, I'm an introvert, right? There are many people who are introverts, but does the gospel compel you? Does the forgiveness of sins and learning that there's one church and seeing all the people lost in the world, you aren't inspired enough or encouraged enough to move beyond yourself, to go out and share the gospel with someone, or to train yourself? You got people that high school diploma degrees, but will we, over here, you've applied yourself to learn a trade, to learn a skill, to get educated. And some of them have honors on there, magna cum laude, summa cum laude. Some of us just passed and just got a degree, but some people have all this intellectual capacity, but then they'll come to Christ and they'll say like, I don't know enough. Like, how does that jive? How does that jive with the master's will? Right? How does the jive with study to show thyself approved, right? How can you invest so much in the world over here for your physical and financial benefit, but then you come to the Lord, we don't take notes. We're not studying the scripture. There's lots of resources out there, but we're just saying, I don't know enough, right? I'm not good at it, right? Are we really trying to accomplish his will, right? And he just hid it. And he did not do anything with it, right? And we can't get away with that. We can get away with that with our parents. We can't get away with that on our jobs, right? The idea is that, are we going to be engaged and serve and do things in a capacity that honors God? And we will want to say about the master, even though Christ is loving, is kind, is compassionate, but we will be held accountable, right? We do have a gracious master who will forgive us of our sin, will help us, encourage us, do all the things. We have a great body of believers here, but there's still accountability. There's accountability to the master, right? There's accountability. And so that's the part that we don't want to leave out, is that there's accountability that we should have to one another. You didn't see the servant go ask and engage to other people like, hey, can you teach me? Can you help me? I'm struggling in this capacity. There's just no engagement in any capacity. The member just went, dug a hole in the ground, and thought that that was sufficient and was going to try to appease the master, right? We got to be the type of people who can accomplish and do. At the end of the day, it's not harsh to say like, I need people on my team that can produce, right? We have to be people who produce at the end of the day. And I learned that by Brother Dennis and a lot of other people who are in the military before me. The goal is to produce and accomplish. Failure is not an option because we have the gospel. It can make a difference. It can change lives. We just have to be committed to it. So does anybody have any points before we move on? Okay, Brother.
He knew that he knew that he expected something. God expected something of him. And he did here. No, I had more talent than others. So everybody doesn't have the same ability.
Yep.
Those who do have some,
That's it.
and not to do anything. Or, I mean, in mathematics.
Yeah.
Zero plus zero is zero.
Yes, sir. Yep.
And so. It is probably a big way. And so it is that you have some ability and you have some kind to influence someone. So you try to encourage them from the problem. And that's the whole thing about the church. At the top of our priority, other than just, you work. And I believe that is one of the key things that we talk about, should be involved in. Now, we don't, somebody said you're gonna do some great thing.
That's it.
Not everybody. You obey God. You do what they did to get that. When I think about this, Paul tells us something very interesting in the book of Romans. Remember we talked about the meeting back to.
Yep.
They walk in the newness of life.
Yep.
And then he said, now, know ye not that who he is of certain
That's it. Yep.
servant obey. He said, you are who he obey, whether the sin and the devil of obedience unto righteousness. But once you say that you work past it,
That's it.
you work the servant of sin, when you have obeyed from that form of doctrine, which was delivered on you, that is a 3%, you became a servant of righteousness. Now, what does that mean? You servant of righteousness. What is the servant? He said, I'm going to command all right. I'm going to make you with that too. And what's one of God's commandments? Open and reach that God. What wants us to tell us? So, we can get this. That's something else. We get this. And we know that the Lord is better. And all out of work.
Yeah.
You can convert to one right here. All brothers and sisters that maybe, fingering on the head and find your example.
Mhm.
I could see why brother Mike going.
Yep.
And see the diligence.
Yep.
And zeal, and it encouraged me to be faithful.
Yep.
You are in the body, each one of them.
Yes, I agree, brother. And you think about how long has the internet been around? 1998, 88? Now, it's been around a long time, right? But did you look at the brotherhood as a whole wasn't fully invested, right? It was hard to find them. Like certain churches had some websites you can go to and pull some information. The internet been around a long time. But did you see after COVID that push throughout the brotherhood to get the gospel out to our people, to us primarily, right? But then look how it's out there now, right? And it's beautiful, it's consolidated, it's concise. You got Digital Bible, you got PTP, you got GBN. It's like these resources are out there structured and consolidated, right? Do you see how those brothers took a push, that Herculean effort that they did to get the gospel out, right? In spite of it. So it's like there's work to be done, right? Like I said, the internet's been around a long time, but we as the church there wasn't as a body, a structure, I mean, the universal body, not just this congregation, but you see all over, brothers made that really hard concerted push to get the gospel out, right? And now we see that if I'm on the internet, I can click and there's so many great lessons and sermons available and folks use up tools to evangelize. But then, yeah.
Now, can all be a part of that work that we evangelize for any network.
Yep. Yeah.
Part of our life.
Yeah. But,
It is terrible, it's real interesting that, he said, I knew you.
mhm.
As you gathered where you have not sown, and reap where you have not strawed. So in other words, he was like, you didn't do this, so I didn't want to lose what you gave me. Now you take that and look at it from the perspective of the church. The Lord isn't doing the seed plant.
Yeah.
The Lord is our God.
This is,
It's our God, and He expects us to do our job.
Hmm.
As a Christian, it's said.
like I said,
So, you know, we
Yeah.
can sit back, and say, well, I didn't do anything bad with it. I didn't preach false doctrine, or I didn't support
Yep.
false doctrine. Yeah, but you try to teach somebody else to God.
that's it, that's it. Yeah, like I said, he left his word, right? Like I use a computer, we use Microsoft at work. You think, Bill Gates coming down here and teaching us by hand? No, he left us instructions. Here's the Microsoft instructions to use this software, right? To accomplish your job. He left us an instruction. We've been trained appropriately. He has performed his work. Now it's us to take that training and go forward, right? We've been trained in the gospel. We have a great product, which is the blood of Christ to restore men to God and restore us to each other. So we have a great product. We just got to go out and utilize it, right? And it's not that everybody wants it. We are planting and sowing. We're planting the seed. Somebody's watering the seed. God will give the increase, right? We're planting, right? If it becomes a harvest, it will be that individual taking that seed that we've sown and doing something with it. Another brother or sister coming along and watering it and adding it to it. Like that's the goal, right? And so we need to just kind of put things in its appropriate context so that it doesn't seem so overwhelming. It's like everything can appear so overwhelming.
Thinking like, if we wouldn't do that with something, that somebody else gave us, somebody gave you, like, marriage gift, right? Like,
Yeah.
here is I don't know, love anything or whatever. I'm just gonna sit down on the shelf, I'm not gonna touch it, and it's just gonna sit there, I just don't wanna break it, I don't wanna lose it, somebody gave it to me. No, you use the things that people gave you to honor the gift that they gave you. But if you put in the perspective that this all belongs to God to begin with, our life, our soul, his word, all belong to him, what are you doing with what he's entrusted with you? You keep that perspective, this all belongs to him anyway. I need to be doing better, need to be multiplying, we wouldn't do it with anybody else.
Yeah, and one thing I learned the older I get is that don't subscribe importance to things, just work, right? The master didn't say it was important, he just gave you a job to do, right? Whether it's taking out the trash, sweeping the floors, work. Do the work that's in front of you and don't think like, oh, this is more important than that. If there's a task in front of you and you have the capability to accomplish that, what's holding you up, right? So that's kind of, I think, how we should view things, right? It's capability. All these people possess their capability and the understanding to do the master's will. The master didn't say, hey, this is more important than this. The master is like all of it. Whatever I said before you, just like within the scripture, everything I said before you, my desire is that you understand and do. There's no exception clause in the Bible, right? Understand and do. Don't worry about what's more important than that. Accomplish all of my will. That's the goal for us in the master, is to work his will. We don't subscribe importance to it because everything's important. We work and we serve and we understand that we're accountable to him, right? And he will hold us accountable as is his right.
Yeah, to kind of answer the questions that the moment is brought up, what did the man say? He said, I was afraid.
You know, sometimes you're given something, and
Mhm.
we're so afraid of messing it up.
Yeah.
We don't do.
Yeah, like I say, yeah, you didn't pick yourself, the master selected you. He has invested his trust in you and you lean on that trust. His knowledge, his will, his education, his trust to give me confidence, right? So that's what we gotta have, that childlike trust. You know, like I said, when we're parents, um, you know, with kids, they can be on top of the bed, they can be up there, you can say, jump, I got you. They say, really? It's like, jump, I got you. Jump. Realize that, you know, that God is the one empowering us. It's not about you and your capability, right? And you see it throughout the Old Testament. The prophets, God came to them, they start self-doubting, right? It's the natural part to self-doubting, but trust in the master. The master have selected you, have trained you, has empowered you, have given you all the resources to be successful. Just trust in that, right? Of course, you're not capable. That's why he trained you, groomed you, and given you all of these things. He didn't say your money. He gave you his money, right? So if you lost it, he has more money. He just said you didn't do anything with it. You know, if you say, hey, I invested in Bitcoin and it came back empty, I had this new adventure, and this is, you try to justify, sir, I did all these things, you lost it. Sir, I lost it. I was working, I had that. That's fine. People just don't like laziness, right? If we don't like laziness, God definitely doesn't like it. So thank you for your kind attention. Thank you for the meaningful inputs for the class. It makes it all better and to help us all grow and get a fuller understanding. This wraps up our Bible class. As we sign out, we thank the audience for their participation and for those watching online.